Chapter 16. Priya. Now that she knew Malini dreamt of fire, Priya began to dream of water. Clear, cool, rippling. Rivers winding beneath her feet, hissing like snakes. When Meena had strangled her, she had a hallucination a little like this, of water coiling about her ankles, of her brother lined in red, liquid-shadowed, more water than his skin. In the moment after, she'd been able to use gifts that had been long inaccessible to her. Her time in the Hirana had already changed her, but now it was shifting and molding her dreams. She woke once in the night and saw that the ground had changed beneath her. The imprints of flowers were all over the stone. As she blinked, confused, they faded. That night she woke again, as she so often did, pitch dark around her, no sound other than maidservants at work to break the stillness, and realized something was different. She could hear a new noise, not the rush of water that slithered through her dreams, not Malini's breath, slowed by her medicine and deepened by sleep. Weeping. She stood up. She crossed the dark room to the side of the princess's bed. Malini was curled up on her side, face twisted in a rictus, her shoulders bent to a sharp angle behind her, raised like wings. She was still deep asleep. The drugged wine had seen to that, but a ferocious nightmare had its claws in her. Priya kneeled down on the charpoy beside her, lightly shook her shoulder, then a little harder, and harder still, when Malini remained curled tight as a thing of a shell. "Milady," she whispered, then more firmly, "Princess Malini, wake up. Wake up, princess." Malini gave a jolt, moved with the sudden speed of a viper. The grip that latched onto Priya's wrist was vicious. Malini's nails dug into her skin as cruel points untempered by hesitation or fear. Her eyes snapped open, but they were unseeing, looking through Priya as if her flesh were glass. Priya instinctually closed her left hand around Malini's, trapping the vice of Malini's hand in a vice of her own. She knew exactly what to do, how to tighten her grip so to make Malini's hand spasm and release her, or twist the princess's wrist until the bone gave way with a snap. "Please, milady," she insisted, keeping her own breath steady to hold back the pain. She knew how to do this, too. "It's only me." For a long moment the cruelty of Malini's grip did not falter. Then, slowly, awareness returned to her eyes. She released Priya abruptly, but Priya was still holding her. Priya uncurled her own fingers calmly, carefully. When Malini remained frozen, Priya lowered her arm for her and said, "You are having a nightmare." "I think I'm going to be sick," Malini said faintly and turned to the side, covering her mouth. Priya leapt up looking for a basin, but Malini was not sick. She merely remained on her side for a long moment, head lowered, hand over her mouth. Then she raised her head and said, "Sometimes my medicine—" "There is no need to explain, milady." Was dreaming again. Priya watched Malini twist the fabric of her sari into knots in her hands. "I am not myself." Priya wished then that she could go and speak to a healer, or even Gautam. They would be able to tell her exactly what dangers to watch for as exposure to needle flower became full-blown poisoning, the cadence of breath, the significance of sleep paralysis and venomous dreams, the dangers that could be read in the pulse or the near translucence of Malini's flesh. But she had no one to speak to. She could only watch as Malini deteriorated. She thought of how she would comfort Sima or even Rook, and could not imagine giving Malini the kind of casual, easy intimacy she had given either of them. She considered placing a hand against Malini's back, but no, she couldn't. "Do you wish to bathe, milady?" Priya asked abruptly. "It's not remotely near morning," Malini said in a flat voice. "I can't leave this room." "You can," Priya said. "Leave, that is, if you'd like to, milady." She had the key to the room bound to her waist chain. She unhooked it, holding it in the faint light. Malini looked at it, looked away, her face in profile. "I do not want to bathe," said Malini. But she didn't lie back on her bedding once more or demand water or food. She did nothing but sit hunched over, her hands curled like claws, staring at nothing. "A walk, then," Priya offered. "A little exercise would perhaps do you good." "Do me good? Would it really?" Malini's hands curled a little tighter. "I do not think walking will cure what ails me." "Walk with me regardless," Priya said, "and I will tell you a tale of the Yaksa." Malini finally raised her eyes, deep, dark, considering. She rose to her feet. Pramila will be angry, said Malini, once they had left the room and begun walking down the corridor. We can return to your room if you wish, milady, Priya said. She wasn't surprised when Malini shook her head. Malini was leaning upon Priya's arm, clinging on as if Priya were the spine holding her frail body up. But her expression was clearer, more focused than it had been since the moment they were formally introduced to one another, lady to maidservant. The wind was blowing across the Triveni, one hard, buffeting wind that raced down the 3 open, empty corridors of the Hirana with the hollow roar of a beast. Priya, dressed in her new sari with no shawl to draw over her shoulders, was beginning to regret her decision to coax Malini from the dark, sick quiet of her jail. She'd actually prefer the sticky heat of a monsoon-laden night to this strange, unseasonable weather. We'll walk around, Priya said, once or twice, and then we'll return to your room, if you like, before the guard patrol next passes through the Triveni, ideally. Did I hurt you? Malini asked abruptly. What? Your arm. Did I hurt you? A little, my lady, Priya admitted. Malini took hold of Priya's right wrist, raising it to a spill of moonlight. Her mouth thinned. I don't bruise easily, Priya told her, but Malini did not let go. She looked at Priya's hand as if she could read it, read every callus and whorl, every line upon Priya's palm, like language. And Priya watched Malini in return, because, well, she could admit it to herself at least, because she was simply wanting to look at her. Looking at Malini felt like a forbidden thrill, but somehow less frightening than meeting eyes, which was too equalizing, intimate. Oh, Priya knew an infatuation when she was in the middle of one. You're strong, Malini observed. I felt the grip of your hand on me, but you didn't even try to stop me. I didn't want to hurt you. How odd, Malini said. Her voice was soft. Finally, she released Priya's arm. I did not mean to harm you either, said Malini. I do not like acting without intent. Priya shook her head. I'll be more careful if I need to wake you in the future, said Priya. She hooked Malini's arm into her own once more and began guiding her around the edge of the Triveni. Now, Priya said, a tale of the Yaksa. She told Malini a simple tale, a story told to children of a young man, a woodcutter, who was born under ill stars. He fell in love. His beloved would share his cursed luck. Any man or woman he married would die an early death. So he avoided other people, Priya said, and his family worried about him all the time, and then he told them he'd found someone to marry after all. Who? Malini asked. A tree. A tree? That, Priya said, is exactly how his family responded. They weren't impressed, I promise you. But he garlanded a tree like it was a bride to him, and he told it tales and gave it offerings of flowers and secrets. And one day the tree transformed into a beautiful man. It had been a Yaksa all along. The Yaksa built the woodcutter a mahal of banyan and banana leaf, and they lived together happily. Now, when children are born ill-starred, we give them a first marriage to a tree, so the Yaksa will watch over them, and their second mortal marriage will be sweet. Malini gave Priya an odd look. Men can fall in love with men in Ahiranya? Oh, Priya swallowed. She'd made a mistake. A simple, innocent Ahiranyi tale was far less so to people who were not Ahiranyi. Surely Malini had heard the stories of people told about the lasciviousness of the Ahiranyi, their willingness to sell pleasure, the looseness of their women, the fact that they were willing to sleep with their own sex, and surely, like all Parijati, she abhorred it. I am sorry, my lady, Priya said. A silly maid-servant like me, I should have known better. She bowed her head in apology. Please forgive me. She felt Malini's hands on her shoulders. Suddenly they were facing one another. Please, said Malini. I'd like to hear your answer. I suppose they can do so anywhere, my lady. Malini shook her head. It isn't done in Parijat. The tone of her voice did not suggest she would welcome questions, so Priya asked none. Instead, Priya said with false lightness, Well, men can only marry women now. One of the first regents did away with the way things used to be here. And there are such tales, Malini said, about women too? There was something hesitant in her voice. Yes, said Priya. She swallowed again. She knew exactly why her throat felt dry. "What other tales shall I tell you about the Yaksa, milady?" "Everything," Malini said immediately. "Anything. I was told tales by my nursemaid, but they were clearly sanitized, made palatable for good Parijati children. I want to know the tale no one would ever tell me." She paused, considering, then said, "Can you tell me a tale from the birch bark mantras?" "Those tales are forbidden, my lady," Priya said, even though she had memorized them by rote as a girl, and still remembered fragments of each poem, ragged ghosts of verse. "Tell me where the Yaksa came from, then," said Malini. "That must be innocent enough." It probably wasn't, but Priya didn't say so. As she guided Malini over a dip in the floor, she glanced down. The floor was marked by grooves like waves, like water. The waves had moved, too. They were not where she'd left them yesterday. "The Yaksa come from the same place everything comes from," Priya said slowly. "From the rivers." "Rivers?" "The cosmic rivers from which the universes are born," Priya said. "Rivers that flow from the yolk of the world egg. Rivers of heart's flesh and heart's blood. Rivers of immortality. Rivers of the soul. The Yaksa were born in these rivers as fish and swam through them until they found the world on the shore. They entered our world from there, but it was the youngest of them, Mani Ara, who came to Ahiranya and made it her home." "What is the world egg?" "The egg that the world was born from." "And where," Malini murmured with a faint tilt of her head, "did the world egg come from?" "The world peafowl?" Priya made a valiant effort not to roll her eyes. "How did the Patijatvi believe the world was born, my lady?" "From fire," she said. "We believe another world burned, and out of it came our own, from ash and flame." "And where did that other world come from, my lady?" Priya added, with a barbed deference. "From another burning world, perhaps?" "It's burning worlds all the way down," Malini said, voice dry, a curl of amusement shaping her mouth. "You've made your point, Priya." Priya's face felt annoyingly warm. She was glad she was far darker than Malini and didn't show her wounds and hungers as easily on her skin. She looked away. "My nursemaid told me of one river," Malini said. Her voice was low. "A magical river hidden beneath Ahiranya's surface. A river called the Deathless Waters. Perhaps you know of it." It took everything in Priya not to stiffen. She had been lulled into a false sense of security by the brush of Malini's hand on her arm, by shared tales. The cold knot that twisted to life in her belly was all the more shocking for it. "You heard me speak of them to Meena," Priya said quietly. "To the rebel, didn't you?" Malini did not deny it. Instead, she said, "I know it worried my father. The children developing strange gifts in Ahiranya. He spoke of it with my mother. He said something had to be done. Her father, Emperor Sikander." "My lady," Priya said quietly, tamping down the little twist of rage in her heart. "Why did you bring me here? Why did you lie about me and claim I saved your life?" There, she'd said it. She'd faced the reality, finally, that she'd made a terrible error when she'd revealed herself before Meena, before Malini, and hidden the truth from Bhumika. "I don't know why the rebel was here," Malini said finally. "She did, perhaps, want to kill me. But when I saw you, Priya..." Her voice faltered. "You're strong," she said finally, "and I will ask you no questions about your strength, but I very much need a friend in this place. A friend who understands how it feels to lose and grieve people you love. A friend who can keep me safe from my fears, and I hope that you will be the friend I need. A friend. As if they could be friends." Malini's touch was so light, the princess felt fragile and looked fragile. "How can you be this soft?" Priya thought helplessly. "How can you know what I am and look at me with eyes like that? How can you be so stupidly trusting?" "You don't make friends," Priya said, speaking through the lump in her throat with some difficulty, "by speaking of their dead." "No," Malini said, with a faraway look. "I suppose you don't." "I liked it better," Priya managed to say, "when you spoke of peafowls. You can do more of that if you'd like." Malini shook her head once more, a low sound of amusement escaping her. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was the closest she'd come since Priya had met her. And Priya, not knowing how to feel, guided Malini once more around the Triveni, watching as the wind whipped about Malini's hair and stopped abruptly. Pramila stood in the western hall, watching them. Her jaw was tight. Her expression was furious. "You," Pramila said, "are not allowed to leave your cell." Her voice wavered like a flame. For a second, Priya thought she was weeping, and then she realized that the waver was not tears but anger, a storm of it that Pramila couldn't quite modulate. Pramila crossed the room, trembling with the force of her feelings. At Priya's side, Malini said nothing. "I knew you'd find a way to use the maid," said Pramila, "and here you are. Did you pay her? Bribe her?" "I was not feeling well," Malini said thinly. "I needed air." "Give me your key," Pramila said to Priya. She said it abruptly, holding her hand before her. "No," Malini said. "Don't give it to her, Priya." Priya had already unhooked the key. She had no opportunity to return it to her waist before Pramila seized it from her. "It is such a small thing," Malini said in a voice close to tears, "to leave my room and feel the air upon my face. If you would only allow me a little kindness, please." "Do not beg," Pramila said, disgust in her voice. "Every time you weep and you beg. I know it's all a lie. I know what you are. I only beg because you keep me penned up like an animal. Do you think my brother wants me to die locked in a small room in a foreign land?" "No, this isn't the way I think he wants you to die. You know exactly what he expects." "Do you really want me to suffer as she did, Pramila?" Malini asked. Her voice was velvet, an entreaty, but Pramila flinched as if it had been a blow. Pramila hissed, eyes harsh with rage, and without pause raised her hand to hit Priya, not Malini, around the face. It was not going to be a perfunctory blow of chastisement. Priya saw that immediately. Pramila's hand was curled into a beringed fist, a hard knot of knuckles and metal rings that would leave Priya bloody, and Priya only had a second to feel a kind of breathless fury rush through her at the ugliness of being used as a proxy for Malini before she raised her own hand to knock Pramila's arm away. She didn't have the chance. Malini slammed into Priya, grasping at her wrists with her cold hands, and placed herself squarely between Pramila's fist and Priya's face. Priya felt a thud and a blinding pain as Pramila's hand caught Malini around the ear and Malini's skull cracked against her own. Priya couldn't move, couldn't fight. Malini was holding her, her nails digging in as they had when Priya had woken her from her nightmare, a pressure like a needle-edged vice. "No," Malini said. Her voice cracked a little. "No, you mustn't." Priya could barely see, through the shield of Malini's body bent against her own, through all her loose dark hair, made even wilder than usual by the wind. But she felt Malini's breath on her skin and knew the words were meant for her. She froze then. Malini did not let go. Princess, Pramila said haltingly, "are you hurt?" "You may hit me again if you like," Malini said, "but you will not hit Priya. She has no part in our business." She remained hunched over Priya. "Go on, Pramila. Do as you will." Oh, you think I won't strike you properly." Pramila gave an ugly laugh, and through the curtain of Malini's hair Priya could see snatches of her face, her wet, furious eyes, and the sneer on her lips. "You think I wouldn't dare risk harming you when you're here alone with me. You deserve to be struck." "I am still the Emperor's flesh and blood," Malini said, voice thin but steady. "Still a princess of Parijat. Strike me if you will, but do not forget that my brother sent me here with a purpose." "Fulfill your purpose, then," Pramila ground out. "Accept your fate, so that I no longer need to look at you." Malini said nothing to that, and Pramila's expression flickered, spasmed, with something dark that lay far beyond hate. Then she calmed, reined in her fury. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed the pleats of her sari. "More medicine, I think," Pramila announced. "You're overwrought, Princess Malini." Malini's exhale was a shudder, almost soundless. "Now," Pramila said, "move, princess." For a long moment Malini remained where she was, folded over Priya, holding her wrists in that painful grip. Then finally she released Priya and moved away. Priya lowered her head, waited. Pramila waved her hand. Malini made a sound, faint as falling leaves. Pramila struck Priya unimpeded. This time the blow wasn't fueled by rage. This was a deliberate act designed to remind Priya of her place, and Malini of her own. But it did not make the cut of the rings any less painful, the blood in Priya's mouth any less nauseating. "Fool girl," Pramila said. "Take the princess to her room. Now. I'll be along in a moment." It wasn't long before Pramila stormed in, carrying the carafe. "Drink it," she said, slamming the wine down at Malini's side. Malini tried to pick up the vessel, but her hands were trembling. Their brief walk, when she had been so lucid, had exhausted her. Before she could drop it, Priya crossed the room. As she drew closer, Pramila flinched, or moved to strike her. It wasn't entirely clear. But Priya looked at her, and the older woman went still. Priya saw a flicker of shame pass over Pramila's face at the sight of Priya's bruised red lip. The rage had passed through her, after all, and now they were all still here, Pramila, Malini, and Priya, who did not matter at all, who wore a split lip and a red cheek as a reminder of Pramila's shame. "I will need to take control of this task from Pramila," Priya thought. "I will need to ensure that the princess isn't poisoned anymore, or she will die." Priya leaned down and took the carafe from Malini. She poured out a measure and placed it in Malini's hand. "Carefully now, my lady," she said. "Here." She helped Malini raise the cup to her lips, helped her drink. If Pramila hit her again, she was not sure she would be able to control herself, or that she would want to. She pressed her teeth over her tongue, distracting herself from the throb in her cheek. Still kneeling before Malini, she offered the carafe back to Pramila, eyes demurely lowered. "If she hurts me again, I will break her fingers, her wrist, give her face a bare-handed blow. I won't stand it. I won't. Pramila took the carafe and swept from the room without another word. A moment later, Priya heard the click of the lock. With no key herself any longer, she knew that she and Malini were prisoners until morning. She exhaled, some terrible tension unfurling from her shoulders. "You are not good at allowing your pride to be debased, are you?" Malini murmured. "My lady, I am a maid-servant," Priya reminded her. "I have no pride to debase." A small smile crossed Malini's lips. "Ah, that is a lie you think you need to tell a high-born lady, is it not? But I know you have pride. We all do. You may lady me and ma'am at your seniors, but I can see the iron in you." Malini raised a hand, brushing her knuckles against the swelling of Priya's cheek. Her fingers trembled still. Priya could feel the sting of the touch. It burned through her blood, sang, and she thought, "Oh no." This was more than a simple fascination. This was attraction, and it was not remotely convenient. "Sometimes you must allow your pride and virtues to fall away in order to win the war," said Malini. Priya's breath stuttered just a little. "Thank you," she managed to say, "for protecting me." "Don't thank me. I did it for mine. If she had angered you truly enough, you would have hurt her, and then you would have been sent away, and I would be alone again." Malini was already beginning to sway. She exhaled, then closed her eyes, then lay back. "Will you stay near when I sleep?" Malini had turned her face away. You may lay down here if you like." Priya swallowed. Did she? But no. There were things they didn't do in Parijat, and there are things, Priya told herself finally, that I will not do, because I am not that much of an owl-brained fool. "I'll sit by you, my lady," she said, "until you fall asleep." Malini didn't argue. She clearly did not have the energy to. She lay still, eyes closed. Her face was going to bruise. Malini's skin was like paper. Breath, pulse, the color of her gums, her nails. Priya did not need to see any of those things to know that Malini was dying by steady increments. She needed a way to keep Malini alive, and she needed the Hirana's strength. Patience, Ashok had told her. Patience and time were key, but patience could only get her so far, and she'd never had a surfeit of it to begin with. She would take control of the dosages of poison. She'd prove herself biddable and easy to ignore once more so that Pramila would hand her the responsibility, never questioning her motives. She'd keep the princess alive, for the sake of Bhumika and the household, and also because it was right. And not because she wanted to. Not because of that at all.